Wano's finally about to be over as One Piece is set to enter its final saga after One Piece chapter 1053. But at the same time, there's still so many plot lines and mysteries that we need some answers to, so what the hell's going on? Well, personally, I believe that once Wano is over, we'll be getting a post-Wano arc that will give us all these answers. So in this video, we'll be discussing these mysteries and plot lines like Zoro's lineage, which ones do we really need some answers to, how will these things play out in the post-Wano arc. But before we get to that, I just need you to subscribe and join our King Pirates crew so you don't miss any future videos. Anyways, let's talk about this post-Wano arc, which actually wasn't an idea that I came up with right away. This was actually super chatted to me during a live stream by Big News, so I want to give a shout out to them. But as soon as I heard that idea, it was like the fog just cleared up and I just saw a clear path, because like many of you, I was really confused once the final saga was announced. Even though I was excited for what was coming next, there were still so many things that I needed more answers to wrap up Wano. So to hear that we were entering the final saga in like 2 chapters was kind of crazy to me, and I was a little worried. But with the idea of a post-Wano arc, I just think it makes too much sense. It could be this really quick arc that just wraps up all of these loose ends and plot lines and gets us moving towards the next island. And of course, in the story, Oda has done this before. We've had a post-Enies Lobby arc, we've had a post-war arc. The post-Enies Lobby arc was 10 chapters and the post-war arc was 23 chapters, but you do have to remember that Ace's flashback and story was in that post-war arc. As far as post-Wano goes, I think it's going to be closer in length to post-Enies Lobby, so about 10 to 15 chapters max. And honestly, with some of the mysteries that still have to be answered, we might even see some parallels between a post-Wano arc and the post-Enies Lobby arc. So without further ado, let's talk about these mysteries that still have to be addressed. And originally, I made my own list of things to go through and talk about, but then I came across this tweet of this YouTube comment of this massive list of all the different plot lines and mysteries they thought had to be answered by the end of Wano. So instead, I think it's going to be fun to go through this list instead, see which ones actually need to be answered, which ones don't need to be answered, and if there's anything that's not on this list that's on my list, I'll address it. Alright, but let's start off with the first point, which is Kokeshi dolls, which some of you hearing that might have forgotten about it and just be slightly confused, but the Kokeshi dolls thing is something that still has to be addressed, even if it's really quick. For those of you that don't remember, this plot line starts off with Tenguyama Hitetsu, who was introduced as a Kokeshi doll collector, and then also when Brook was snooping around in the castle in the flower capital, he also found a room with Kokeshi dolls. And that is pretty much the only 2 concrete pieces of this plot line, but the fact that Oda put both of those things in there does mean he has to finish this plot line. So I do expect this to be one of the things that do get addressed in the post-Wano arc. And kind of tying into that is we need to find out Hitetsu's actual identity. He still has a mask on, we still don't know why he has wings. And of course, the long-running theory surrounding this is that Hitetsu is actually Sukiyaki, because back during the Oden flashback, it looked like Sukiyaki might have been playing with Kokeshi dolls in the background. Sukiyaki and Hitetsu also have the same voice actor in the anime, so there's a few potential ties to that theory, but I do think this absolutely has to be addressed. Moving on to the next point though is the poneglyph, and I think obviously this one will be addressed. I think that's what Robin is doing currently. A lot of people were worried about Robin after her not showing up in the recent chapter, but I think she's just finding the road poneglyph and reading it right now. After that, the next point that is made is the Nidai Kitetsu, and originally I thought this was something that had to be addressed, but now that I'm thinking about it more, I'm thinking it's not really that important, because the more I think about it, why does the Nidai Kitetsu need to have any more relevance? Like, it could have just been a cool Easter egg that Oda had in there. Honestly, I think with the Nidai Kitetsu was more so built up expectations that Zoro was going to end up getting that sword, and I was a victim to that as well. And it's still entirely possible that Zoro ends up getting the Nidai Kitetsu, but I don't think he needs it at this point, and the Nidai Kitetsu could just be a cool Easter egg. But let's move on to the next one, which is Tama's promise with Ace, and this is another one I don't think is really a big point. I guess what this really boils down to is whether or not Tama is going to be joining, and at this point I don't think so. I think if anything's going to be mentioned as far as her promise with Ace is that she's going to stay in Wano, get a little stronger, and eventually she'll end up joining Luffy's crew. After that though, we have a pretty interesting point, which is the guy in Wano clothing drinking with Crocus. For those of you that just caught up with the One Piece manga, this was something that we saw on a cover page a long time ago, and out of all the points that this user made so far, I think this is probably the biggest stretch. Like, first off, it came in a cover page. That in itself should like tell you it doesn't have to be addressed in the main story. I do hope eventually we get some answers on that in another cover page or like an SBS, but this is something that definitely does not have to be addressed in a post-Wano arc. But the next point they make is actually pretty interesting, which is why Wano is called the Land of Gold. Again, for those of you that don't remember, this was something that was very quickly mentioned by Onimaru when he fought with Zoro. And while I think this is a minor point, I do think this has to be addressed at some point, and we need some more information on just Wano's history and importance. Because in terms of the Void Century and the Great Kingdom, Wano is clearly a major element of that. Given the fact that they were the ones to make the Poneglyphs, that in itself is huge. So I absolutely believe that we need more information on the history and importance of Wano. I'm just not so sure it has to come by the end of Wano, because this is something that just could be fleshed out when we find out more information altogether about the Void Century. On to the next point though, which is Zoro getting revenge for Yasuie. And this, I think, is another thing that was built up out of expectations. In particular, the people that believed in ZKK really pushed this narrative of like Zoro killing Kaido or Orochi for Yasuie. But at the end of the day, like, Zoro defeated King and he won the raid, and I think that was enough to get revenge on Yasuie. It's not that deep. What is important for Zoro though is the next point they make, which is Zoro's heritage. And this is one of the major things that absolutely has to get resolved in the post-Wano arc. At this point, we all know that Zoro is from the Shimotsuki village that was founded by Kozaburo. We found that out in the SBS earlier, but even in the story, Zoro actually realized it. So there absolutely has to be more than that. Like, who are Zoro's parents? Give us some answers. Why does he look so similar to Ryuma and Ushimaru? Of course, with Green Bull showing up, a lot of people have the theory that he's Zoro's dad, so maybe that kind of ties in. But one way or another, I expect some answers on Zoro's lineage and his parents, even if it turns out like they were nobodies and they really weren't that important, or post-Wano actually ends up paralleling post-Enies Lobby, where we found out this time that Zoro has a Marine family member. On to the next point, we have character development for Yusa's kid, and they specifically said, for a guy who just beat a Yonko, he seems like a fairly flat character with no role going forward. And this one's kind of funny to me, right? Because Kid just defeated Big Mom and everybody's still just slewing him. But to an extent, I do actually agree with them, because with Yusa's kid, I always said, like, we don't need the feats for him. We need to understand the why. Because in the story, he actually has one of the strongest convictions to his dream of becoming the Pirate King, but we just don't know why he has that conviction, so it's kind of hard to connect with him and believe in him. I think eventually we absolutely need some answers on his backstory. The fact that Killer's face is all bandaged up, there's got to be a story there. I just don't think it's something that we needed by the end of Wano, even though I wanted to see it. So at this point, I don't think we're gonna get in the post-Wano arc, but eventually in the future of the story, we will. But moving on to the next one, this one's pretty funny. Any point in Apu or the numbers existence? This one's kind of funny because both of those characters really didn't do anything in the entire Reina Onigashima. We do recognize Apu's role now, where he's the guy that leaks the information, but for a guy who's a supernova, he definitely did not do much at all in this arc. I was dying for the Apu versus Brook fight, but we just never got that. As far as the numbers go, they were definitely the biggest disappointments in the Beast Pirates. They were pretty much just strong fodder. I do think the fact that they are ancient giant experiments from Punk Hazard, that's gonna come back to matter in some way, but that ties together with Kaido's race, which was one of the biggest questions I wanted answered in a Kaido flashback, and we just didn't get it. And at this point, I don't think we're gonna get it in a Kaido flashback, so maybe it doesn't get addressed in this post-Wano arc, but eventually, like when we finally meet Vegapunk, that's one of the things that I think needs to be addressed. Moving on to the next one, this one's pretty weak, which is the number that was friends with Yamato that looked like Ushimaru. Once again, this was just fan speculation that kind of blew things out of proportion. I never really believed in that theory, and it was always a theory, so I don't think this point is valid. The next point about Yamato though is very valid, which is her character arc in general, and they specifically mentioned her last exchange with Kaido, where Kaido was yelling to her about her fate as an Oni. And this is something I've talked about and harped on for a while, which is Yamato's race and Kaido's race and their relationship, like their race as an Oni. There's history there, there's meaning there. If you go back and read that conversation between Kaido and Yamato, he's clearly projecting some of his own feelings and experiences to Yamato. So this I actually think absolutely has to be addressed, and I think and hope it's gonna happen in the post-Wano arc. My personal theory on this is that Yamato's gonna talk about this, and we're gonna go through this flashback, and she's really gonna come to like realize herself, and she could be Yamato and just be herself. Whether she wants to identify as a man or a woman, it's up to her. But at the end of the day, she doesn't have to be Kazuki Oda anymore to accomplish her dream. She could just be Yamato. So I'm definitely hoping we get a lot of character development and this information about their race in a Yamato flashback in the post-Wano arc. And tying into that is the next 2 points that they make, which is number one, Kaido and the Beast Pirates calling Yamato a he. They go on to say, I'm pretty sure it's not because they respect Yamato's pronouns, which I know that's gonna trigger some people, but I've always believed in this for a while. Like, because genuinely, I just don't think it makes sense. Like, this is a selfish, abusive father that only saw her as a weapon, hated the fact that she wanted to become Odin, but for some reason was very progressive and was like, yeah, you're my son now. That just never made sense to me, so I always thought she was gonna go through this like character arc, but as of right now, I'm not completely sure. Honestly, I think Artur from the Library of Ohara made a really good point where he just kind of brought up like the mess that it's been, where like outside of the manga and external sources like the Viva card, Yamato has been identified as a female. But within the story so far, everybody's been using male pronouns with Yamato, and in the most recent chapter, she went to the male bath, and he pretty much just says things are really nuanced right now and there is no right answer, and that's absolutely okay. Like, we just have to wait until Oda really clarifies things to really figure out what is going on. This right here is the best tweet in the thread where he says, "This is unfortunately a constant problem in the fandom. People argue for weeks it was obvious Kaido would get back up, among many other things. Ultimately, One Piece fans just love to act like you don't get Oda and are always right even when something may be ambiguous." And that right there is exactly it. It's a very ambiguous case. When I say that, I think Yamato is gonna go through a character arc and her being Oden is kind of weird. It's not me disrespecting her identifying as a man. Like Kiku, it's been very clear since the start, and I respect that a lot, and I call Kiku by the right pronouns and everything. But Yamato's just been another case that's been very different and very unclear, and I think is very ambiguous. So as far as her character arc goes, I do hope things get cleared up by the end of Wano. Another thing that's mentioned though is Yamato's mother. I don't think this has to be a major thing, but I do think it should be addressed very quickly, just like who was she, and that's all I need. Moving on to the next point though is Kara in general, which they go on to say that Kara was a complete non-factor in Wano. And with this one, I feel like it's also another thing that kind of just got tainted by expectations, because there was so much talk about her becoming a Straw Hat. A lot of people started to have expectations of development and focus that is at the level of a Straw Hat. But I think at this point it's very clear she is not getting that same level of focus, and she's probably just a side character who had a good run in Zou, but like it's not the same thing as her becoming a Straw Hat. But moving on to the next point, we have whatever name Onigashima used to go by according to Marco. And this is a very minor point, but I think it's something that absolutely has to be answered. Like, what is the history there? Once again, this kind of ties into the history of Wano and why it's so important. In a way, it kind of connects to Kaido as well, with possible connections to his race and why he ended up renaming it. This is absolutely one of the things I think that needs to be answered in the post-Wano arc. After that, we have a point about Basho Hawkins, and honestly, at this point, I just don't care about Hawkins. I think with the way his story ended, with him finally making a decision for himself, that was a fitting end. And at the end of the day, I think he was just a victim to too many characters in one arc, and you can't focus on everybody. The next point I also don't think is that deep, which is that the shadow at the end of chapter 1004 was never confirmed to be Hiyori. I think it's pretty obvious at this point it was definitely Hiyori. It could get addressed in like a one sentence like conversation between her and another scabbard, but even if they don't address it, like who actually cares? The next point though is pretty important, which is Toki's role in the Void Sentry, but I don't think it needs to be addressed by the end of Wano. Once again, anything kind of connected to the Void Sentry, I think that could always just come later when we find out more information. So this is an important point, but we might just find out more about it later. Following that though is something I do think has to be addressed, which is where the Big Mom Pirates and the world government doing? Tying into this is another point they make later about King and Queen and the Beast Pirates. Like, where are all these people? It's been 7 days and we have no information. So this is absolutely information that has to be addressed by the time Wano ends, and I think we definitely will get some answers in the post-Wano arc. After that though, we have a point about Zunisha and where they went. I think is still definitely working together with Momonosuke, and it's gonna play a role in actually opening the borders of Wano, but because Momo doesn't want it to happen right now, it's just like kept walking for now at least. Either that or it's like close by and it's like kind of ready to be in reinforcement anytime it needs to be. The next point after that is Zoro and the Grim Reaper, and this one I'm starting to really think it was just like kind of a personification of how close to death Zoro was. I do think it's a little weird that we've never seen anything like that in the story before, and Oda just chose to use it at that moment. So I fully understand why everybody has freaked out about it and wants some answers to it, but it might not be that deep at the end of the day. Opening Wano's borders is the next point I think that absolutely will be addressed by this post-Wano arc. Why is Momonosuke keeping it closed for now? What is his plan? How will it be opened? We did also see a crack in like Wano's land, so is that gonna force them to open things up? Is Green Bull gonna come through with some negotiations with like things from the Reverie to force them to open up? There's a lot of different ways that could go, and we definitely get some answers in the post-Wano arc. The next 2 points are kind of just critiques. Number one, Chondro being revived and the whole Flame Demon thing not really being that important. That's a point I absolutely agree with. I think some of the fake deaths were kind of just pointless. I still don't know why Kiku's really alive. Honestly, looking back at it, I think Orochi probably could have died a little quicker. But the next point that is made is pretty interesting, which is Caribou and his role in the story. Obviously, we know he knows some pretty big information about Shirahoshi being an ancient weapon. It seems like that really wasn't utilized in Wano, but I do think it absolutely has to play a role at some point. It is a little weird that so far in Wano, the only thing he's really contributed is bringing Luffy meat feet and also having a key to help during Udon. But his knowledge of Shirahoshi, I think, eventually has to be relevant, or else that's definitely kind of just weird. Like, why have him have that information? After that, though, we have Law's goal of learning the true history when he doesn't have any way of reading poneglyphs. That is something I kind of question, because I don't think he's gonna stay with the Straw Hats after this arc. Maybe he ends up just like keeping a connection with Robin somehow and like keeping Viver cards or something like that. I think at this point they're gonna be allies like pretty much after Wano and beyond. But as far as what he's gonna be up to after Wano, I'm really curious on like what the direction is gonna be. He's a fan favorite at this point. We've been with him for pretty much the entirety of the New World. He almost feels like an honorary Straw Hat at this point, and it's gonna feel a little weird separating from him. He absolutely has to go chase his own goals in his own ways, but I really don't know how he's gonna do that after Wano. The next point that is made, though, is about the Beast Pirates awakening, and I think this one's a little bit iffy, because even though it was never mentioned that they were awakened, I think you could easily say like, oh yeah, they were awakened always, and that was just their forms. Once again, I think this is like expectations getting out of hand of people thinking they're getting back up with awakenings, when in reality, they just could have been awakened from the beginning. This next point is good, though, which is why Momonosuke can't die and what was in Oden's journal. I'm sure we're not gonna get like the full answers to everything, because Oda likes to keep things mysterious. But at the very least, I think we need some information on Momonosuke's current thought process and his goals and why he wants to keep the borders closed. So I think in the post-Wano arc, we'll definitely at least get some hints. On to the next one, we're talking about Kaido again and why he wanted to die, and this is something I don't know if we're gonna get, but I really do think we should have gotten it. Not only with him wanting to die, but there's still little bits of information that like him getting defeated 7 times and little information like that I really wanted out of the Kaido flashback. But at this point, I just think the Kaido flashback is actually over, and the only way we get more information is through other flashbacks. So although I want to see this, I'm not gonna bank on us getting more information on it. After that, they go on to talk about why Drake Blue is covered to save Law. Of course, this ties into the theory that Law is also a Sword member, so that could certainly be an answer. But personally, I never believed Law was in Sword, so my take on this is Drake knows like the reason he survived was because of Corazon and Law, so this is kind of his way of paying them back. Eventually, I do hope this is addressed, but it doesn't really have to come by the end of Wano. As far as Sword goes, though, I do hope we also get some hints, but it's also not something that has to be addressed by the end of Wano. The same thing applies to the next point of Sanji's Germa transformation. Like, we kind of just know what happened. The raid suit activated it. As far as him telling the other Straw Hats about it, that's just not what the Straw Hats do. Like, Usopp learned observation haki and he has told nobody. So we just don't get those types of interactions. Like, we might get some reactions when we finally see Sanji use those powers, but that's probably going to be it. And then finally, we have 2 last points. One is the road poneglyph, which I think Robin is doing now. And then the last point that is made is Big Mom's role in Wano, which is absolutely one of my biggest question marks that I have right now, because depending on whether or not Big Mom is dead, that's really going to change my perspective on her character. I really did not think she added much to her own character arc in Wano. Her role in Wano was pretty much just a very strong plot device for Oda to make things happen, and for her to just die in this arc, I think that would be pretty bad for her character. Plus, they mentioned that point about Luffy saying he's gonna defeat Big Mom and defeat all of the Yonkos, so like that just kind of dies as well. So Big Mom's fate, we definitely need some answers in the post-Wano arc. But that right there is gonna do it for me. This was a much longer list than I expected. I don't even know how long this video is gonna be, but if you had a good time, please drop a like for the YouTube algorithm. And let's just go ahead and play a quick game of rock, paper, scissors. If you lose, you have to like, subscribe, and watch the next video. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot!